staff of the Tuolumne River Flow, or Trust, Tuolumne River Trust, watches over the Tuolumne River. I asked him if he helped found it, and he said, sure. He didn't. It was founded in '81, but he's, I think, one of the prime movers, because I always associated with him. So you should too.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Appreciate you having me here again. And thanks to Molly for the wonderful snacks you provided. I'm curious, how many people have seen my presentation before? A few of you. So I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that you would have seen last year, but I've got a lot of new stuff too, so I'm going to kind of move pretty quickly. So our organization, Tuolumne River Trust, was founded in 1981. At the time, more dams were planned for the Tuolumne, and this was after we had lost the Stanislaus River in the 70s when they built the new Malones Dam. And the folks who were involved in that campaign, who were a lot of voters, felt they needed a different approach. It couldn't just be, you know, hippie rafters saying we want to save the river. They had to broaden the movement. Sierra Club and Audubon and others created a new organization, Tuolumne River Trust. And the idea was that we're preserving this incredible resource and trust for future generations. So we worked a lot with family camps and the angling groups and others, and really broadened the campaign. And in 1984, we achieved wild and scenic status, federal status, for the upper 83 miles of the Tuolumne. So, huge victory. The group could have declared victory and got home, but we stayed together as an organization. And now we're working throughout the watershed. We have an office up in Sonora. We're very active in the root fire restoration, trying to improve forest management, recreation there. In the Central Valley, we have an office in Modesto. We do river cleanups, we do habitat restoration, including we purchased 1,600 acres at the confluence of the Tuolumne and San Joaquin, and it's being restored to wildlife habitat. And it's amazing how quickly the trees have come back. We also do organizing in low-income communities along the river. And I work out of our San Francisco office. We do education in the Bay Area. We have a lot of different events. Advocacy, and I'm the policy director, so I do a lot of that advocacy work. Feel free at any point just to stop me and ask questions or tell me to slow down and move kind of quickly. So the Tuolumne originates in Yosemite National Park. It drains the northern half. The southern half is drained by the Merced River, which carved out the Yosemite Valley. And you can see Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, where the San Francisco PUC gets its Tuolumne River water, is actually in Yosemite. And the river flows, and there's a much bigger reservoir, Don Pedro, which is about 6 times as big as Hetch Hetchy, and it's owned by the Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts. And it's primarily used for irrigation of crops. 200,000 acres in Stanislaus County are irrigated with Tuolumne River water. Flows through Modesto, joins with the San Joaquin, flows up into the delta and the bay, and some of that water even makes it out the Golden Gate into the Pacific Ocean. So this is the headwaters of the Tuolumne. It's the very beginning. This is the Mount Lyell Glacier. It's more than 13,000 feet above sea level. And the glaciers don't provide very much water for the river. It's mostly snow melt. And as snow melts or rain falls, you have all sorts of little streams coming out of the mountains there, getting bigger as they join. And the name Tuolumne starts just above Tuolumne Meadows. And this is where a lot of people experience the river if they have indeed seen it. So beautiful, beautiful part of Yosemite there. And then the river flows through the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne, which, by the way, is a fantastic backpacking trip. So if you're ever looking for like a 3-day adventure, it's really wonderful. And you can see, like a lot of Yosemite, it's carved out of granite. The glaciers had actually carved out in the past. So there's not a lot of sediment going into the river, not a lot of erosion. So it's incredibly clean water as it enters Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. It doesn't have to be filtered. It's one of the few municipal water supplies that doesn't have to be filtered. It does get treated with chloramine to kill germs and such. But incredibly high quality. And Willie Brown, when he was mayor, played with the idea of bottling Hetch Hetchy water and making some profit. But the federal legislation that allowed them to build the dam in Yosemite prohibited this kind of profit making. I said, didn't go too far. So the Tuolumne, there are hydroelectric projects on the Tuolumne. San Francisco has 3, and then Don Pedro, the big dam there, another one. The water comes 160 miles to San Francisco. It's gravity fed all the way. And it's not just San Francisco, about 1/3 of the customers are in San Francisco. 2/3 are in San Mateo, the northern part of Santa Clara, and the southern part of Alameda County. So we share the river with a lot of other species. This is a rainbow trout, and rainbow trout are really fascinating. They always start their life in fresh water. They can live their whole cycle there. They can lay their eggs in the river and start the next generation. But if they have access to the ocean, many of them will go out and become saltwater fish, and they'll live in the ocean where there's a lot more food. And when it's time to spawn, they have to come back to the fresh water. They come back to the same stream or river where they were born. They can actually smell the difference from the sediments, and they'll start over. And so a benefit of living in the ocean is there's a lot more food, and they bring those nutrients back up into the upper watershed and can help fuel the ecosystem. A lot of different species depend on the fish in the river. One of my favorites is the river otter. Very playful, lovely creatures. We've got Homo sapiens in the river area. It's world-class whitewater boating, rafting, kayaking. This is actually a class 5 rapid, the one on the river, Clavey Falls. And it's just really exciting. It's a remote area. You don't hear traffic. Occasionally you might see a plane go overhead. You need to get a permit or go with a commercial company to get on so it's not too crowded. But wonderful, wonderful trip. We usually do 2-day trips, so we camp out, we bring our gear, our food, and that's half the fun. Is just you can have some excitement on the water and then relaxing on the beach and having good food. Maybe find a swimming hole. A lot of people like to fly fish. So for all these reasons, the Tuolumne was designated Wild and Scenic the Upper Tuolumne in '84. And that means no new dams can be built and no development along the banks, and then a 1/4 mile river. So here's Don Pedro, the biggest reservoir. Everything upstream of that is the Wild and Scenic stretch, the Upper Tuolumne, and downstream is the Lower Tuolumne, which is getting a lot of attention these days. This is the Don Pedro Dam, and it's about 600 feet high. So the rainbow trout upstream, they can't come down and go back up, so you don't have steelhead upstream of this. But you do have some downstream. And this is the upper part of the Lower Tuolumne, very different. It's not the whitewater, it's much flatter, it's great for canoeing, but really beautiful in a different way. And we do a lot of canoe trips. We actually have one coming up on Saturday the 28th of this month. And then the first weekend in November, both Saturday and Sunday, we do canoeing with the salmon. So the salmon are starting to come up to spawn, and we pass it by and wish them well right now. So these are salmon, and like steelhead, salmon start their life in fresh water, but in general need to go out to the ocean to mature and come back to spawn. And these salmon are called fall run Chinook salmon. So there's spring run, but we don't have those on the Tuolumne anymore. There's a winter run and kind of a partial mix. So these are fall run Chinook. They're also called king salmon because they're the largest. This one weighed 108 pounds. Usually maybe you get 30 pounds. And this one died. The life cycle is when they're in the ocean, they live there for maybe 2.5 years. This one probably was there for more like 4 or 5. And when it's time for them to spawn, they stop eating. They'll come back up the river where they were born if it's accessible. The female will lay about 5,000 eggs. The male will fertilize them, and then they die. And then all those nutrients from the ocean are spread throughout the uplands. So it's really a salmon-based ecosystem that we think about. There are keystone species for the world. Do we need to worry about that, Gary?
I don't think so.
I was in Hawaii when there was that ballistic missile.
That was the worst.
Oh, we were out walking along the beach and everyone's phone started going off and everyone was like, what do I do? Everyone was moving somewhere, but. So again, salmon are keystone species. There are more than 100 other species that depend on them all the way out into the ocean with orcas. So really incredible. So a female will lay about 5,000 eggs. Most of those will be consumed by other creatures. The fry, the juveniles, most of those are consumed. The adults, most of those are consumed. As long as you have a couple that are coming back and spawning, then you have replacement value. So if there's a lot of good spawning habitat, you'll have a higher return. So a lot of competition for the water. We talked a little bit about the SFPUC bringing water into the Bay Area, but 80% of the developed water is used for agriculture. I think I just got the alert. Silver alert, missing endangered elder. So yeah, 80% of the developed water, the water that's taken from the Tuolumne, is used for agriculture. And in an average year, only 20% of the river's unimpaired flow, the natural flow, makes it all the way down the river to the San Joaquin. So it's really changed the ecosystem dramatically. So in 2009, when our supervisor Joe Simidian was in the state legislature, he authored the Delta Reform Act. And the goal there is to meet the co-equal goals of ensuring reliable water supply and restoring the Bay Delta ecosystem and the tributaries that feed it. So this process, part of it was to update the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, which was first approved in 1978. It was required by the Clean Water Act. And it's supposed to be reviewed every 3 years, but it hasn't been updated since 1995, so it's been 25 years. And the first thing they did was a flow criteria study, how much water would need to flow down the rivers to fully protect the ecosystem. And for the San Joaquin River system, they determined 60% of the unimpaired flow, and for the Sacramento, 75%. That wasn't a recommendation. They said, you know, we know there are other beneficial uses of this water, but if we're just looking at the ecosystem, that's what we would need. So, once in a generation opportunity. We've been working on this since about 2011, and these things take a long time. But we have some good news to report since last time I was here a year ago. So the Delta drains half the water that falls in California. It's the Delta, Bay Delta estuary is the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas. It's fun to read the historic descriptions of the Delta from the early European explorers who came here, and just the bounty of life, you know, birds taking off and creating a shadow over the land, and being able to walk across rivers on the backs of salmon that appeared, because there was so much wildlife, grizzlies roaming the shores of the bay, etc. Tremendous biological diversity, more than 500 species of fish and wildlife. It's the migration corridor for the salmon and steelhead and other anadromous fish that start in freshwater, go out to the ocean, and return. It's a major stopover for the Pacific Flyway. A lot of food in the estuary for that. And historically, we had more than 1 million salmon spawning in the Central Valley rivers. So this was just an incredible ecosystem. And I think it's very fitting that San Francisco and San Francisco Bay are named after St. Francis, who was the patron saint of animals and the environment. So that's our legacy here. Well, things have changed with the gold rush, people moving to the Delta area and along the rivers, creating levees that prevented the natural flooding, constraining the rivers, and then diverting so much of that water. A lot of water from the Delta is pumped down to Southern California, to the southern part of the valley. And it's really changed that whole Delta ecosystem as well as the bay. So the lower flows in our rivers, remember on the Tuolumne it's down to 21% on average, can concentrate pollutants, agricultural runoff, there are other chemicals that end up, and temperature is a huge thing in water impairment because the native species like that cold, fast-moving water, and as it gets warmer it can become lethal. This picture was taken on the Klamath River back in 2002, and you might remember that farmers in southern Oregon were complaining about not having enough water, and the Bush administration said, okay, let's give them a bunch of water. And 70,000 salmon died in the Klamath. The water was just too warm, so they weren't able to spawn. Their 5,000 eggs each. Obviously, fish need water to migrate coming back up the river, but also to get flushed out when they're small. And the faster they get flushed out, the more you have survived, because they can avoid predators and other lethal obstacles along the way. Floodplains are incredibly important. This is where the juvenile fish like to hang out, where there's a lot more food, so they can get bigger and can survive more predators. But also they're out of the main channel where the predators are. A lot of the predators now are non-native species like bass. And so when you have this floodplain habitat, they can get twice as big there, and when it's time for them to out-migrate, you have a much better chance of surviving. We've really changed the ecosystem. This is water hyacinth. It's from South America, and it likes warm water. I mean, it evolved in more like pond environments. So during the drought, we just had mats of water hyacinth for miles. So you can't see where the water is surfacing there. And so this has a lot of different problems. It can impede the migration of salmon, and it can just choke the river. And then underneath that, you got a lot of bats and other non-native species. During the drought, we had a problem, you might have heard about these algae blooms in the delta. It's actually cyanobacteria that produces a neurotoxin that can kill pets and wildlife and make people sick. And that was from this, the water getting so warm and stagnant. The bay, things have changed dramatically. There's a salt freshwater balance that now the bay only on average gets about half of the freshwater inflow that it historically did. Some years it's down to a third. And between 1975 and 2014, in a 40-year period, there was only 1 year that was naturally super critically dry, and that was 1977, driest year on record. But because of all the diversions, 19 out of those 4 years have been super critically dry. So this has affected everything from plankton at the base of the food chain all the way up to creatures like orcas. Salmon, we still have a commercial salmon fishing industry in California. It had to be closed in 2008 and 2009 for the first time just because there weren't enough fish. So lost a lot of jobs and a lot of money. And this is a nice chart because it shows escapement is the mature fish coming back up the river. And what they did is they adjusted the flow 2.5 years. And so basically what this says is when you have high water years, you have a lot more of the juvenile fish making it out to the ocean. And then you see 2.5 years later, they're coming back. So you can see there's a pretty good correlation here between flows and survival. So this brings us back to the Bay Delta Plan, Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. Phase 1 focused on the San Joaquin River Basin and its 3 major tributaries, the Stanislaus, the Tuolumne, and the Merced, the Tuolumne being the largest. And it took a long time. The draft environmental documents first came out at the end of 2012. In 2013, we had the hearings, a lot of comments. The State Water Board realized this was incredibly controversial. You have these water agencies saying, you know, this is going to really harm us. We're going to sue you if you go forward. You got environmental groups saying you need to do more. And so they went back to the drawing board, then the drought hit, and that took precedence. So finally, in the fall of 2016, the new draft environmental document came out. And it recommended 40% of unimpaired flow in the San Joaquin between February and June. Those are critical months for the juvenile fish. And there were a lot of commenting. The State Water Board, I think, did a fabulous job with their environmental analysis. They knew they had to have the tightest document possible, and they did a great job with it. And there were a number of delays on the vote, but finally on December 12th last year, they did approve the 40% unimpaired flow February and June. So that was a huge victory. They adopted the flows, but there are still 2 more phases that need to happen before things can move forward. Phase 2 is the Sacramento River and Delta outflow, so water coming into the Delta that actually makes it to the bay. And phase 3 is who's going to provide the water. So when you start getting into water rights, and that's going to be controversial. So there's also some flexibility. It's called adaptive management. That flows could range from 30 to 50%. And based on whether biological goals and objectives are met. So the idea is if you can be really proactive with non-flow measures, things like gravel augmentation to help with the spawning beds, predator suppression, that's what that funny picture is on the left on the top, restoring the riparian corridors, there's more shade, there's more food. If you can do things like that and successfully meet the goals and objectives, it could go as low as 30%. But if we're not meeting goals and objectives at 40%, it could go as high as 50%. So what the water agencies are pushing for right now is a parallel process called voluntary agreements. It sounds great, hey, they're voluntary, they're agreements, what could possibly be wrong with that? And what they're offering is, hey, we'll do a lot of these non-flow measures, but we don't want to give up water. And some state agencies are working with them, and we don't think are very strong. We don't think that the voluntary agreements are really based on science. But the reason they have as much support as they do is that maybe if we avoid lawsuits, something could happen soon rather than waiting 10 or 15 years for lawsuits, and maybe by then the salmon are all gone. So that's happening on a parallel process. The State Water Board, they have drafted their goals and objectives. We haven't seen them yet, but we're expecting them to be released publicly fairly soon. And we've heard they're pretty good. Meanwhile, in the voluntary agreement process, they might come up with a different set of goals and objectives that are easier to meet, and hey, wow, we achieved our goals. In mid-October, we're expecting the State Water Board to make a determination if the voluntary agreements have enough promise to proceed on to environmental analysis.